Kind of an all-time low in terms of disengagement in organizations. About, I think, 79% of employees are disengaged. So I wrote the book actually because I work with a lot of toxic environments. I was working with toxic leaders, and I kept seeing organizations change performance while quietly eroding their humanness. So it affected me personally and my well-being, and I wanted to do something positive about it.
Welcome back to another episode of Limitless. Today I'm very excited to have Nitin Goil with us. He's the co-founder and CEO of Restoration Labs, and it's a great timing to have him on the show because he has a new book out there, The Restored Organization, and we're going to talk about why people and performance must thrive together. Nitin, a warm welcome to you. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much, Nick. Really a pleasure to be here on the show, and thanks for the invite. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And what a great way to start 2026 with having this very relevant conversation with you. So again, truly happy, and thanks again for the invite.
Absolutely pleasure to have you on the show. So just kick us off here first, maybe a brief introduction, Nitin, just of yourself to listeners as well here.
Sure. So I'm Nitin Goil. Like you said, I co-founded this organization called Restoration Labs. Recently, an author of a best-selling book called The Restored Organizations, which we published last May of 2025. Been in the culture transformation and leadership space for about 15, 20 years. Studied psychology, so I'm a counselor by profession, which I practiced in the US, and also taught a lot of courses on interpersonal skills and leadership in the US. And then lately, in the second part of my life, so far in my career, I have been a consultant, a facilitator, and also a coach as well.
Absolutely exciting to have you on the show. I love the combination of coaching, psychology, and leadership. So we're going to dig into this today for sure, Nitin. And then let's start with your book then. What made you write The Restored Organization in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So as you know, Nick, I mean, we are really at kind of an all-time low in terms of disengagement in organizations. About, I think, 79% of employees are disengaged. With all this stuff which is happening around AI, 6 out of 10 people would need upskilling, as you know, and trust is really dropping globally. 68% of leaders, and this is from the Edelman Trust Barometer, saying 68% of leaders really misleading their employees because they're so performance focused in terms of getting results. So I wrote the book actually because I work with a lot of toxic environments. I was working with toxic leaders, and I kept seeing organizations change performance while quietly eroding their humanness. So it affected me personally and my well-being, and I wanted to do something positive about it rather than just avoid it or gossip about it. And I became over time possessed about this aspect of culture, which in abstract terms, it just means where values are not lived, where people who are not allowed to challenge or push back others, and really well-being initiatives are just perks rather than systemic changes. So I wanted to change that and offer really a path for people that heals that brokenness and that disengagement, that fragmentation, and restore trust back just amongst employees, within leaders, and really make culture actionable through those courageous conversations.
That's absolutely wonderful to hear, Nitin. Yes, you identify that many of the company cultures are toxic and how to then move from that into trust. And I was also impressed then to read the forewords by someone else who I know care a lot about company culture. You have the CEO of Great Places to Work, Michael Bush, who wrote your forewords. Maybe you can share something about that as well.
Yeah, truly humbled, Nick, to have Michael Bush, like you said, the CEO of Great Place to Work, agree to the forward. Michael, as you know, has spent a lot of years just proving that trust is really the foundation of performance. And they measure at Great Place to Work, they measure trust as a very important factor when they certify organizations in terms of greatness. So Michael's focus really aligns perfectly with the book. Trust is that currency of restored organizations, along with inclusion and empathy. We call it the DNA of restoration, that is connected through courage. So through courageous conversations, you can really restore trust, and develop and include people while you're developing their trust, with an ounce of empathy. So without that DNA, culture collapses, and with it, culture becomes a living strategy, where organizations become more human. So Michael Bush really reminded us through this process that trust really isn't soft. It's that hard currency in business. And his forward really signaled to me that restoration is part of a global movement, which we want to be part of in terms of humanizing work and humanizing workplaces. So it aligned really perfectly with the message of restoration, and then trust being one of the core DNA in the book around restoration really fit perfectly as well.
Absolutely great to hear. Indeed, trust sits at the core there. And what is then the core problem that the restored organization is responding to in today's workplace?
Yeah, I think the core problem is disconnection, between leaders and employees, between values and actions, between that aspect of humanness and results, right? So overall theme, or the tagline in the book is, humanizing workplaces and transforming results. It's really that polarity of, the aspect of bringing that humanness back in organizations and also driving results, you see. So you go to the extreme where you're just very results focused, where I was part of some organizations like that, and it tends to become very toxic because you're just constantly asked this question, what are the numbers, and just focus on results where you don't focus on the people. And then you become too much on the people side or the human side, and you become a very nice to have organization, which is a family, has a family culture and so forth, and where there's no sense of that accountability. So there is that balance of both, which is very, very important. So the core problem the book responds to is actually how do you connect people better through that aspect of humanness, because organizations, as I said, are fragmented. So restoration is about building back better, keeping those foundations strong and aligned so that people and performance both can thrive together, right? So the workplace problem isn't so much disengagement as I see it, it's disconnection. We are just not connecting with people at that human lens. And restoration to me is that operating system that makes organization more holistic in the big scheme of things.
And Nitin, we have heard about company culture now for quite some years and the well-being of employees. We understand it's important. So why are so many employees still disengaged in the workplace?
Yeah, so I think because I think culture, and like you said, Nick, you've been in the well-being space as well, are often treated as just initiatives or just one-offs, right? Maybe campaigns and perks or slogans which just look really nice on the wall or just on paper. But really, people are not being focused on that systemic shifts in terms of changing things. And that requires courage. How do you really go below the surface in terms of foundation? And how do you really look at what's cracked over time within the culture or the DNA of the organization? So disengagement or disconnection persists when leaders don't address that root cause of things, right? Whether it be lack of trust, lack of empathy, or lack of culture. So in the book, I shared a lot of examples. We've shared close to 54 strategies. But one of the examples which comes to mind is we share an example of a tech firm, which was really focused on this aspect of well-being and bringing well-being back in terms of the organization, because they were very focused on the tech aspect of things. And they introduced a lot of these things, such as mindfulness training and yoga classes and a lot of different perks for people. But employees were still very disconnected, surprisingly enough, right? And so we realized, talking to them, that when leaders started addressing some of those toxic behaviors, under the surface behaviors, and started showing a lot of that vulnerability with open and courageous conversation, that those well-being initiatives started to matter. And they started to focus on the holistic aspect of people rather than just the physical aspect of things, right? So I think that is really key. Like, I feel perks or these things, sometimes values, people can't even remember the values of the organization at times, right? So it's like we are making things complex because they sound good, but they really don't restore courage, culture. And courage does. So I think the red thread to me throughout is, how do we have courageous conversations? And the things which haven't changed over time is because of that aspect of lack of courage, right? So if we treat culture as a system, right, that really we have to look at this operating system. There are different aspects to it. I just wrote about it 2 days ago, that culture to me is like an engine of an aeroplane. It has so many different parts and wires and all of that. And unless you look at all those intricacies, you can't really look at the full holistic things of how that system works truly.
Yeah, and you touched on vulnerability there, authenticity and holistic leadership and so on, topics that I'm also talking about. And what I feel many times, Nitin, is that leaders are torn between, yes, we need to be human here, and humanity, we need to look after the people. But at the same time, people are breathing down the neck, the bosses, the leaders are breathing down the neck. They need the results. So how do we find a balance there, and what is the trade-off?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. And I think the trade-off, Nick, is that this idea that if you create that humanness, you create that authenticity, that the results will come, right? So I feel at times organizations tend to focus a little bit on the short term. We're getting results. Right now, we are on this AI bandwagon. Everybody's talking about it, and everybody's just going with the flow without really asking, do we have the right people? Do we have the right culture to really sustain this augmentation with AI long term, right? And that requires an aspect of really slowing down a bit and really taking that view from the balcony to look at, hey, what is the culture? Do we have the right people on the right bus? They may not be on the right seats yet, but do we have the right people on the right bus to really live and execute our strategy long term? Right. So I feel that that aspect actually leads to more and better results, as we have seen with one example of a manufacturing company, that they reduced accidents and increased productivity after embedding empathy and fairness into their daily leadership practices. Right. Leaders actually listened and actually acted on what they listened to. And it was that humanness that drove results in this particular company, which you see in the book as well. So I think we need to have that people first strategy, right? And knowing very well that that people first strategy would lead to results, and then the tech first or the AI first or the results first approach comes in. So it is a little bit of that augmentation which is required, but both are connected. But to me, that aspect of that humanness is the primary factor which would drive results as 2x or 3x long term and sustain it.
And Nitin, can you briefly explain a concept that you have in your book, just in a very brief way, the flower framework, and why is that important to work across industries and cultures?
Yeah. So Nick, the book is a research-based book. So we interviewed close to 100 plus organizations globally. And what we found when we were talking to people around what will get you the right culture in terms of driving results, we constantly heard people, and the red thread we saw across was what flower framework is, where everybody said fulfilling culture, that sense of purpose is important, the F in the flower. Listening culture, actively listening and listening with empathy is important. Ownership culture, that sense of accountability, vulnerability and authenticity, which you talked about, is important. And well-being, right, in terms of holistic well-being is important, not just physical well-being. And then enterprising and results-based. So being innovative, very, very critical and important. And then most importantly, also results-based culture. So what came as a red thread throughout the conversations was what actually formed the flower framework. And we realized that across cultural differences globally, that kind of stayed constant. So some wanted to focus on fulfilling culture. So it's not a linear framework. You can focus wherever your gaps are. But at the end of it, that is what's going to humanize workplaces and actually drive results.
Yeah, and I would also curious here to hear about perhaps one of your case study. Maybe you can mention if there was some big mistakes when someone trying to then, should we say, fix the culture.
Yeah, so I think, again, this aspect of when you treat culture as a project, right? So we also interviewed organizations where they launch a lot of programs around culture building or values building or, this idea of what is truly going to be our tagline for the organization and so forth. So thinking culture can be fixed in a quarter was a big mistake. And there was a few organizations which we interviewed which really wanted to do that, and they were surprised that it's not working. You see, so culture isn't broken machinery. It's actually a living operating system, like I talked about. So the mistake is always trying to do a short-term fix of addressing the underlying issues rather than restore it, which again takes time, and it takes courage, which is very, very important too. So culture adapts. And we saw this with few organizations as well. They adapt on how people think and act and influence, and it evolves with every decision people make, as long as you're having those courageous conversations and treating it as a little bit of a long-term fix and treating it as a living, ongoing strategy.
So what I'm hearing here from you, Nitin, is that we shouldn't just do an event once a year to tackle culture. This has to be part of the DNA of the organization.
Absolutely, Nick. Absolutely. And you see that probably a lot more than me in terms of well-being, where we'll just do, one initiative or something once a year and twice a year, and things don't change. It has to be a constant habit. If you're not practicing that 3 to 5 times a week, and this is embedded in neuroscience, your prefrontal cortex, we can't remember things if we are not practicing them daily. Right? So whenever you're looking at culture and we look at new nuances, whether it's principles, whether it's values, whatever it is, if you're not practicing it daily, 3 to 5 times a week, and somebody's not having you accountable for those things, it's not going to change.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, Nitin. And thank you so much for having come on the show today to talk about your new book, The Restored Organization. And just before we let you go, if there's some leaders here who's listening today, is there any action you can recommend that they take to restore trust and performance in their business?
Yeah, thanks again, Nick, for the time. Wonderful having this conversation. So I would just leave with this. I think for leaders who are listening in and tuned in in your audience, I think asking that one courageous question: what's one truth that I'm not speaking to with my team that's going to change things, right? And then listening to that truth without defensiveness. I think that single act, inviting honesty, restores trust. Will unlock engagement and will signal to people that culture is not just that one-time fixed thing which we can put on a wall and on paper, but is actually a lived reality. So one courageous question can restore trust, and culture shifts when leaders really invite authenticity and honesty.
Fantastic. What a way to end the show today, Nitin. It's been great having you on. If any of the listeners want to continue this dialogue, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, the best way is just reach out to me on LinkedIn, Nick. That's the best way to contact me. And happy to have this conversation and really with you and everybody else, just carry this movement of restoration forward within the community globally as well. So thank you again. Really a pleasure being on the show and wishing you the very best for 2026.
Fantastic. And likewise, Nitin, to you, and thanks to all the listeners as well.